yes men who sit there, yes sir, yes Mr. President. He's got one next to him, the loony Dutchman, Mark Rutte, Secretary General of NATO. What does it take to do that job? Whatever. And he's got pie charts and graphs that he's showing off to Daddy, and trying to ingratiate himself with the president. Just the sycophancy of that whole display with Mark Rutte from the Netherlands is embarrassing. And he's clearly angling for a job in Washington or with some defense contractor. So he's absolutely kissing the you-know-what of Donald Trump. But what Rutte did, what's funny about that is he basically was bragging about how many U.S. flights, how NATO played a role in attacking Iran.
Yeah,
It's an undeclared
I
war of
have that
aggression.
clip actually. I
You
have that
do?
clip actually. Yeah, yeah.
I'd love to see it.
We can play that. It's very short because I wanted to actually talk about this and what it means for Europe, and of course whatever else you wanted to say. Here you go.
I think so. Yes, you're right, and I totally understand the disappointment. But when you take, for example, Italy, 500 U.S. planes took off from U.S. bases in Italy to support Epic Fury. So this is massive. When you look at the whole of Europe, again, it's between 4,000 and 5,000. A country like Romania, its capital, Bucharest, they had to cut down on commercial air flights and airplanes because they had to use the airport for the tanker facility. So all this is taking place.
So there you go. Europe was a major party to the war in Iran, which of course, very good for Europe, right, Patrick? Whatever you please continue. I know we interrupted earlier.
What he's done there is I'm glad he's done this because it's opened up a big conversation, and he's implicated Italy and Romania. And we can also throw Germany and Britain and other countries, Greece, into that mix, these NATO members. He's implicated them in an illegal, undeclared war of aggression. Completely illegal, completely unprovoked, and just rapacious killing of Iranian civilians and infrastructure, and just trying to do damage. War crimes, crimes against humanity. He's implicated all these NATO countries. So what Mark Rutte has basically done there is saying that Europe's in the war. Europe's part of the war. We are a co-belligerent. Europe is a co-belligerent in the war. Iran didn't violate Article 5. They did attack some U.S. bases where the U.S. is in NATO. How come the European countries didn't send their air force to attack Iran? Of course, they didn't send anything. They're not going to do anything because the United States is NATO. But what they've done there is Iran, according to the laws of war, would have every right to fire an intermediate range ballistic missile at any of these bases in Italy, in Greece, or Cyprus, or Romania, or Germany. And what would the Europeans do? Oh, there would just be righteous indignation and outrage. How dare these Central Asians attack Europe? This is an unprovoked attack of Europe. We can't allow this to stand. We mustn't appease. This is, Hitler all again. It's Poland, Gleiwitz. That's the reaction of the Europeans, and not having any of the self-awareness to understand that they are a co-belligerent. They've allowed their bases like Saudi, like Bahrain, like Kuwait, like the other Gulf states that were the UAE, that basically incriminated themselves by hosting U.S. military bases that were used to attack and murder Iranians and destroy Iranian infrastructure, which is a war crime. So they painted a target on themselves technically. Now, Iran's not doing that. They're probably not going to do that. But if they wanted to, they could. And they would be completely legally, according to international law, within their rights. And Mark Rutte himself just impugned Italy and all of these countries. He just sentenced Europe to a future debit on their ledger. Okay? You notice how nobody ran to the defense of the Gulf states because they couldn't make a legal argument because Iran was right. Did you notice that? Nobody came to their aid, really, because they couldn't. They're caught with their pants down, allowing the U.S. to use them as lily pads for attacking and starting a massive, risky, and horrendous war. And the Europeans are no different than the Gulf states in that respect. No different. The only difference is, it's white Europe. They wouldn't dare attack us. We can attack them. That's fine. We're okay with that. Let's celebrate it. 500 U.S. flights from Italy. You want a standing ovation for Mark Rutte. Oh, but if the Iranians hit back, oof, no. That's an act of war. Snapback sanctions and all the rest of it. This aggression must not stand. I mean, I'm so sick of these people. But this is the same convoluted argument they use with Russia. They've been able to sell this with Russia and erase the fact of everything that happened from the Maidan and NATO's proxy war in the Donbass for 8 years prior to February 2022. They're able to whitewash all that because they have total control of their own media and political discourse, to the point where most people don't even know what actually happened in Ukraine and how it happened, much less have a clue that the United States initiated a violent coup and a civil war in that country, which led to Russian intervention in the Donbass. But with Iran, it's no different. It's no different. So it really, I think, that's one of the really obvious failures of the argument coming from the West. Mark Rutte just exposed it. I mean, we have to thank him. We need to send him a card, or maybe a box of cookies or biscuits or something to thank him for doing
Where's
that.
Victoria Newland when you need her? Huh?
Yeah, the bag, Mrs. Fields. So that's one of them. The other one is there's another collusion. I don't want to belabor this point, because I've talked about this a lot recently, because I think it's a central point and it needs to be discussed. This can no longer be relegated to the kind of can't talk about it category. The whole basis of the impasse in Lebanon is based on one thing: that the U.S., Israel, and its allies have labeled Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. And that gives them carte blanche to occupy Lebanon, to violate international law, to do everything outside of international law. The United Nations does not designate Hezbollah as a terrorist organization, and neither do most countries in the world. But Israel does, and its allies must if Israel insists. That's why those designations exist. Hezbollah hasn't attacked any European countries. They don't have an expeditionary terrorist arm, but they are legally proscribed as a terrorist organization. And their political wing, which holds the majority of seats in the Lebanese parliament, is also proscribed as a terrorist organization. Explain how you do that. But that's the problem. That is the seed of everything, because that's allowed them to isolate Hezbollah, and it's allowed them to leave them kind of to fend for themselves in South Lebanon, to repel the Israeli invasion, to protect the southern border. Okay, if they allowed the Lebanese armed forces to have all of the equipment, like an air force and air defense, to control their own airspace, Israel would not be able to roam around carte blanche in Lebanon, and there would be resistance and negotiations ultimately, because force meets force. Ultimately, there's going to be negotiations. There's nothing now, just bullying and a Lebanese armed forces policy of not to engage with Israel. So Hezbollah is engaging with them, and this is all by design. This has been engineered, this situation, over decades, because the U.S. want to separate and Israel wants to separate the Lebanese army from Hezbollah. They don't want them to integrate like the Iraqis did after the battle of ISIS, when the Hashid was folded under the Iraqi MOD. They don't want that in Lebanon. They want to isolate them so they can pick them off, and also so that gives them an excuse to invade and occupy. That's simple, and this is the basis of it. There have been groups that have been proscribed as terrorist groups, and then the proscription's reversed. It's happened to the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization.
Yeah.
That's a good example. What about the MEK? The United States had them listed as a terrorist organization. Now they're not, for different reasons, obviously, not for anything good that the MEK has done. Although pouring money into the pockets of U.S. congressmen and senators is probably a good thing in Washington. That's what the MEK has been doing since Hillary Clinton lifted their prescription in 2012. They're just pumping money into the U.S. political system as bribe money to get them to, well, they promise that they'll achieve regime change in Iran. That's the whole sales pitch for the MEK. So what I'm saying, Danny, is that's the center of the problem, actually. That's what's distorting the whole thing and creating this tripwire that and allowing Israel to break every rule, to commit genocide. You could extend the same question to other resistance groups in Palestine. I'm not going to name any names, but take your pick.
Right.
So that's another conversation that Europe is too afraid to have, because they don't want to go against the Israel lobby in the United States. So they just go along to get along. Well, guess what? Look at the situation in Lebanon. You think this is good? And who are the terrorists in Lebanon? Who's been slaughtering civilians? Who's displaced 1.5 million people? Not Hezbollah. Israel has. Who are the terrorists? Just look at the record. Look at what they've done. How long can they keep this facade going? This pantomime, this joke of a geopolitical theater in the political sense. I mean, it's not a joke on the ground, not for the Palestinians or the Lebanese, but in terms of the politics of it, it's a joke. It's a bad joke at this point. And, shame on the political leaders in Europe, in the US, for allowing this pantomime to continue, and all based on these political designations that are not objective definitions of anything. And again, the United States doesn't list any of these groups as terrorist groups. In fact, the UN Charter, Article 51, says, well, you have a right to armed liberation struggle by force, if necessary, for self-defense. So that's in Article 51. It's also enshrined in the Geneva Conventions, which we all ratified, our governments. We ratified the Geneva Conventions and international human rights law as well. It's so, if the whole purpose of this deception is to take this situation out of an international law framework, to pull it out so that they can run their own bilateral justice framework between the U.S. and Israel. Hezbollah is completely compliant with international law and compliant with ceasefires. Israel's not. So, but they don't want to give them agency, and they can do that simply by slapping a label on them. It's as simple as that. This is the central, fundamental obstacle, in my opinion. And it's been abused, and look where it's got us. Look where it's got us. Not very good. Not a very good place.
Yeah, we can. The number of Israeli settlers that have been injured and or killed by Hezbollah is such a dramatically small number, and we've covered that here on this program. And nonetheless, exactly as you said, they have the right to resist occupation. And you mentioned groups. The precedent has been set in the past for the United States to undesignate terrorist groups, but there was one. Remember, Patrick, 2024. What happened in Syria? HTS, aka Al Qaeda in Syria, came to power on the with Jolani as the figurehead. He had a massive bounty on his head by the U.S. State Department for how long? And now no more bounty. And he is the president of Syria. And he sat down at the United Nations with who? David Petraeus and these types, and just sat
in the Oval Office, Danny.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and the cologne, he was given 100 colognes,
Yeah. So that was reversed. They reversed Al Qaeda. Yep. So don't tell me it's impossible and it can't be done. Of course it can be done. By the way, you mentioned people killed in northern Israel. Okay. That is part of back and forth hostilities. But what started it? October 8th, October 9th. What happened? Hezbollah fired rockets and on IDF positions. And the global headlines said, or what Trump calls the fake news. The fake news said Hezbollah attacked Israel. But that was a lie. Those IDF positions were in occupied Lebanese / Syrian territory, the Sheba Farms, not in Israel. Israel is in violation of international law, multiple UN resolutions by even being there. They're legitimate targets, the IDF. So Hezbollah was merely firing at invaders, technically. And then Israel unleashed all hell after that against Lebanese targets, and the Hezbollah responded. So by the time you're into the response and counter response and tit for tat, you can't go and sort of wag your finger and say that, after Israel has, completely slaughtered thousands of Lebanese civilians for no reason, you can't go and then complain if Hezbollah returns fire in northern Israel. So for the very same, they can use the same justification Israel does in terms of their security. They are Lebanese, and they're not occupying Israeli land, but Israel's occupying Lebanese land, and lots of it now. But even before that, they're occupying 13 different slivers of behind the UN blue line, or on the UN blue line. And they were supposed to leave from those positions from 2000, and they didn't. Why? Oh, because of our security needs, Israel. So they don't have to abide by any international law. Look, if we imposed international law, the U.S. decided it was going to do that, all of these problems would be gone like that. It would just evaporate. It'd be over. But the U.S. can't do that because they themselves don't want to be pulled up on all their violations of international law. That's the problem.
Yeah, you can't open the can of worms. Nope. You cannot open. Well, in the last 5 minutes that we have, Patrick, I think it must be noted that whether it's a Hezbollah, Palestinian resistance, and let's put Iran, of course we put Ansar Allah in there. Let's put Iran in there now, even with what we opened with in the Strait of Hormuz throughout this whole period. Whether it was firing on tankers or targeting U.S. assets in the region, the number of human beings, whatever you think, whether it's U.S. military, people on these tankers that have been injured or killed, is minuscule to what Iran has experienced. And Iran intentionally, we can see it even with something like hitting this tanker with a drone or the U.S. assets. They're out there to destroy the assets. They don't actually really care or care to hurt people. We don't think that Karashabar, however you say it, or any of these advanced Iranian missiles and these drones can't kill people. You don't think they could have gotten that F-15 pilot? They could have probably, but they don't, in large part because they follow the laws of war and they have no interest. Actually, I believe in Iran, and probably for a lot of the resistance, is killing people is probably seen as not the most desirable thing when it comes to how they follow their cause.
Dead U.S. soldiers could advance the Iranian cause in so much as they might create pressure in the U.S. political system to de-escalate or withdraw, but that's not their intention. And if it was, as you said, Danny, they could have done a lot more.
You don't have to. You don't have to be so targeted. Yeah, it's certainly they knew where the troops who fled the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain and started staying in the hotels, or the same in the UAE. Started staying in the hotels. They knew where those hotels were. They could have easily, but then you might put the migrant workers in the UAE and Bahrain, the Arab population, whatever, at risk. And so, turns out that the resistance is thinking a little bit more about morals and principles. Shocker.
They're much more circumspect. They're much more circumspect all the way around, and the U.S. is not. Israel certainly is not. Let's not forget that Trump said he was going to end their civilization. I mean, that's not an empty threat. It's not an empty threat because they already sort of begun doing that or attempted to do that. You saw those black clouds over Tehran when they were targeting oil storage facilities in a city with a population of 12 million or 15 million, and all the health effects, generational health effects that people are going to experience from that. Do these people care in America about that? They care about all the pregnant women that might have had miscarriages because of that, or all the poisoned drinking water, and all the children that are going to be chronically ill going into the future because of that. Do they really care? So
yeah. Well, thanks to those who gave super chats. This is an interesting question, Patrick. Do you have a 60-second explainer of how the United States started the war in Ukraine? Asking if we have videos. I mean, you could watch both of our coverage of this over the course of years, but
I'll give you 60. I'll give you 60 seconds. The United States backed a violent coup in Kiev in the Maidan in February of 2014, with the expressed intent of regime change, and that basically triggered a violent civil war of 8 years, whereby the United States encouraged Poroshenko and then Zelensky after him to deploy their army to attack and kill their own people in the Donbass, Ukrainian nationals who spoke Russian, okay? And 14,000 people were killed as they were shelling civilians in Donbass, and that went on for 8 years. Russia basically said this has to stop. They did a UN resolution. A Security Council was unanimously passed to do the Minsk Accords, and the Germans and the French intentionally sandbagged it, as did Poroshenko and Zelensky, to buy time for NATO to arm up the Ukrainians for a bigger war against Russia. So it was all by design, 100%. And I'm just giving you like 1% of that story there. But that's what you need to know. And Russia said, if the UN Security Resolution fails, 2202, for the Minsk peace process, if it fails, we will have no choice but to intervene, probably. And guess what? They did. So the Europeans and the Americans intentionally sabotaged the UN Security Council peace resolution, intentionally sabotaged it. They're on record. Angela Merkel, Francois Hollande, Poroshenko, and Zelensky, 4 people admitted it on record. So this isn't a conspiracy theory. That's what happened. And Russia did exactly what it said it's going to do a humanitarian intervention to protect their people in eastern Ukraine. And then Europe and the West, all holy murder. Oh my God, this injustice must not stand. This aggression by Putin. It came out of nowhere. He woke up one day and decided he was going to take over Ukraine. And if we let him take over Ukraine, he's going to roll all the way to the English Channel.
Yeah.
In a nutshell, that's the narrative.